Hi, I'm Martin, as you already saw me up there. Pleasure to be here. My first time in Lithuania, and so far I really like it. Vilnius is a beautiful city, and it's great to be here. I feel like I'm one of the outsiders here at this conference. Didn't see that many other designers around, so be prepared for some more visual slides. But actually, I think it's great that I'm here and that I got invited because I think the communication between developers and designers needs to improve and can only get better, and it's already happening, fortunately. But today I'm going to talk about interface design in times of information overflow. And I start with a short introduction of myself and my studio. We're located in Hamburg, as you already saw. This is our little office in Hamburg, in Germany, and we work with a variety of clients from small startups to big enterprises to big startups. We're not startups anymore. But our background is in information design and infographics, mainly print infographics, as you can see. And we did that for quite some time, but then turned that into a digital world, because nowadays we mainly work on UI, UX design work and focus on that. But it's actually a very logical step coming from information design, but I'll talk about that more later. And so I'll talk about the importance of information design and how information design should be structured in my mind. So not that long ago, actually, the information that was surrounding us wasn't that much. It came from standard media like magazines, books, and television, definitely the visual content at least. But today, information is everywhere. It's surrounding us. It's thanks to the mobile internet. You have information wherever you need it, and it's not the question if the information is out there. The question is if you can actually find the information that you're looking for. And this is where design comes into play and can help you and can be a tool that helps the user and guides him to the information that is most relevant for him. And this is really what good information design can do and should do. So that also means that you can't just go in, take a set of data, turn it into most obvious visual way of data visualization, and then don't create any additional value, informational value. You really have to become an author and expert. That means you have to take ownership of your topics, have to take responsibility, and really, really understand the deeper meaning and the details of your project, because otherwise there's no way you'll be able to communicate it back in a proper way to others. That also means that you have to do the very annoying part too, like dive into those Excel sheets and whatever kind of data set that you have and find interesting correlations and interpret it, analyze it, and then finally find new visual ways to present those findings and highlight your findings and ultimately create this additional informational value. So meaning the user or the viewer should be smarter after looking at what the information design was presenting. And I'm still like to show this example. This is a very old print project I did as my diploma thesis back in 2009. So it's 10 years by now, wow. I was dealing with the 10 largest German cities and just trying to gather as much data as possible about those cities and trying to compare them. There were different categories like climate and tourism, public transportation, and other things. But what I really want to talk about is this graphic here, this hexagon. This is looking at population statistics. And the 6 corners of this hexagon are representing the 6 different categories. In this case, it's population, the foreigners living in the city, the unemployed people, the pupil, the students, and their spending power. And the green line in this case is Hamburg, and the other black shades are the other 10 cities, the German cities I was looking at. And the middle point is always 0. So, and the outer ring, the 100%, is always defined by the biggest amount. So meaning the population spike you see in the background there, this is Berlin with its almost 4 million inhabitants. And the good thing with this is that first it was just like a bunch of numbers and data. And by just putting in those numbers into this format, you can see similarities very easily and very fast. So looking at Dortmund and Essen, for example, apparently the structure of their inhabitants is very similar, which wasn't a surprise because those cities are geographically very close to one another and also have a very similar history and background. Frankfurt and Stuttgart, though, are very different cities, and that was really surprising to see that there is a similarity between those cities when it comes to their population structure. And just by turning this into this graphic, you were able to see this without looking at the numbers. But the next logical step coming from infographics is to put this extra layer of interactivity on top of infographics, because that opens up a whole new world. And we did a short demo or prototype for this very same graphic with a development intern we had in-house. And this is just showing you that you can now change the different categories, like you can throw in bars and sunshine hours and whatever for all the cities, and just like click on cities in the map. And you see that it becomes a much, much richer tool than just this simple printed infographics. And it becomes a more playful thing, and it's up to the user now to use it. And this is really the magic of UI and UX design, and of course the development behind it. But that also means that information design doesn't mean infographics. That's still a misunderstanding for me that's out there that I'd like to get rid of as soon as possible. Information design for me really is a way of thinking, a way of approaching something. And that also means that creatives are not visual artists or anything. Creatives, in my mind, are problem solvers. That's what they have to do. And creatives is not only designers. That means developers and all people who are involved in the product development phase as well. And I want to show a case study of a concept that we did a while ago. It's actually by now quite old, but back then in 2015, I think, that was the status quo of infotainment systems in cars. And it still looks like that very often. And it's just very cluttered, very old-fashioned, ugly. It's definitely getting better, but back then it looked like this. And Tesla is the one over there. They had a huge screen in their car. They still have like the 17-inch screen in the middle of the console. So we just took that as to base a concept on. And I really like this quote from James Murphy, which is, "The best way to complain is to make things." So instead of just complaining about all the bad stuff that's out there, just go and do something better. Of course, that's easy if you just throw out a concept. I know there are a lot of limitations and restrictions behind that. So, but still, there are a lot of things that can be improved. And this is why we started just on the side, work on this concept for just a few weeks. So we didn't spend too much time. It was just to show up a few ideas. And we came up with this concept that there is a dashboard that is customizable, so you can change it to the driver's needs, and that is also depending on the driving situation, meaning if you're at the stopping light, you're parking the car, you have access to all the different widgets that you need. While you're driving, though, it doesn't make sense that you have access to a browser or anything, so it makes sense that you have access to your music, to your navigation, and to your consumption, maybe. But then when you come to a critical point in your drive, like you have to take a sharp left or something, the navigation tool takes over the whole screen. Another thing that is, of course, critical for cars is navigating the screen, the touchscreen. I don't say that touchscreens are necessarily the best way for a car, but for us as interface designers, we couldn't really start working on hardware designs first, so we just picked the screen like this. But there are things to make it easier to navigate it, and multi-touch gestures are one of them. For example, if you want to change the temperature, you don't necessarily have to hit the tiny button down there. You could just hit with two fingers somewhere in the area and swipe to change it. And same is true for volume. Just slide up or down with two fingers, and it would change the volume, which is easier to do if you're looking at the street and navigating with the screen as well. So again, none of that is like completely thought through. It was just a concept. It was just an idea that we wanted to throw out there. But the reaction we got was actually really huge. There were so many blogs and other people writing about it, posting about it. And of course, it was great PR for us, but it also shows that there was a huge need and demand to talk about this topic, because people are actually frustrated with what's going on in their cars, in their really expensive cars as well. So that was good for us, and Tesla actually apparently was well aware of that as well, and it took them 8 hours to get in touch with us after we published the case study, and they reached out like, "Hey, don't you want to come over and talk about this?" So we actually did that. Unfortunately, they understood that they need a good design team in-house. Something that big that needs to be so well baked into their hardware, they need that in-house, and that's totally understandable. But it was still good for us that we got connected into this world of the automotive industry. We worked with Volkswagen afterwards, with Byton, which is a new startup, like Chinese money, but US-based, and German managers. They have a huge screen in their car as well, and we also worked on some comp sets for that. But again, they do that in-house now. But you can see that companies are starting to understand how important that is. Another one was QT, which is a software company who builds the software behind those systems, those in-car infotainment systems. So like Tesla and Ford and some others are running on their system. So they approached us to build a demo based on that Tesla concept. And there we also took a look at the cluster that is behind the steering wheel, the speedometer in particular, because there is still a lot of room for improvement nowadays. I'll come to that on the next slide. But you can see here that the speedometer is just this bar that goes up and down and shows you additional information like when are you over the speed limit, when are you under, when you might need to switch gears, how long your fuel will last compared to your navigation and other things. But somehow, currently, the industry still does that. Those are all digital clusters, so those are all screens, but they're still trying to mimic those static gauges, those old-fashioned dials, and there's no reason to have them anymore, especially if you have a screen. Why? I mean, it makes sense to show your speed, sure, but you can show it in a digital number, that's just enough. And there's no reason to show that, I know the English name for it, the thing that shows you how high your motor is running. But especially with an automatic car, you're not shifting gears anyways. So why do you need that? It just takes up way too much room. And especially with the two examples on top, one is Volvo. They show you the card, the map in the middle, which is good, but there's no way to have a bigger view at it. And this is what you're really looking for if you're navigating. You want to have the card right in front of you. And the other one to the next is BMW, and they have gauges on top of the screen. So they're actually silver rings on top of the screen that cover the screen. The good thing is they're changing that. There are new generations coming out where it's better, but you can still see that they're coming from this old world where actual industrial designers were designing those clusters, and now those same designers often start to design interfaces, which is just not the way it should be. And even Mercedes, who have this very new system now that's all digital, they're still trying to mimic this skeuomorphic approach that it looks like a dial that has metal and everything. There's no real need for that. The good thing is that Tesla learned very quickly, and what they have in their Model 3 right now is this screen. I don't think it's good there's nothing behind the steering wheel, but I think that's because of budget issues. But still, it's good that they're focusing solely on the things that matter and just throw everything out that's not needed and concentrate on the interface itself. And I had the chance to drive a Model 3 in San Francisco last year, and this is a video I took. And what they show you, instead of the dial and everything, they show you speed, but they also show you your car, and it shows you the car surrounding it. It shows you what the system is seeing, so what the sensors are getting. And it's really helpful because it shows you what they see and what they don't see, so it gives you trust in the system. And it helps you to understand how this ultimately, hopefully, self-driving car will work. And this is much, much better information than just looking at those old school dials. And they are brave enough to make that step and do it like this. And the good thing is that also means in sometimes that the software design can actually change the hardware. So here, I'll show you how to navigate the fan. And instead of pretty much all other cars where you just like have all those little fans everywhere and you can turn them and move them around, here you can on the screen fluently change the flow of air. And you can tell that this must have been a software decision, so that they figured out, okay, let's do it this way and build the hardware accordingly so that it supports it. There's no way you could build that into another car that doesn't have the hardware detached or attached to this. And I think that's a great sign that people start to understand, and definitely companies start to understand, that the software becomes a much, much bigger factor and that hardware should be built accordingly and that should match. And so that also means that creatives, and I said it before, I don't mean designers here, I mean all kind of creatives, are becoming product engineers and product innovators and product managers and ultimately entrepreneurs. So this is really a great thing if you're a creative or if you're in the creative, technical, digital industry. there's so many ways to start your own ideas and start your own things. And we did that a while ago with a little app called Nextler. That was kind of like the first approach to start our own software, our own little side business. And this was in 2012. This is what was available in the App Store for public transportation. And they were all very list-driven, very old-fashioned, very ugly. And we decided to take that quote literally this time now and really make something better and complain this way and put something out in the world. And we came up with this concept for an app that is helping you to guide through public transportation. Nowadays, this sounds actually ridiculous because we have Google Maps and all those other great apps and tools. But back then, at least in Germany, Google Maps wasn't available for public transportation. So there was no way to find a good way to navigate through the public transportation there. And so our approach was just base it on your current position, show you stops around you, search for different paths, look into the different stations and so on. Nothing, today that all sounds very obvious, but back then nobody really had it. We even worked on a second version, but unfortunately we didn't really have the money or the time to bring that to life. But still, even the first version was quite successful. So we had 10,000 downloads after 1 week, and we were selling it for 99 cents, which is not a good business model. I know that for sure by now. But it still brought us into the second place in the German App Store after 2 days, right after WhatsApp, because you still have to pay for WhatsApp back then. But it really helped us a lot to learn about what it is to launch a product. It's almost like having a baby when it comes to the fact that you think you're very well prepared, but in the end you will be overwhelmed. It's you can't prepare for everything, and that's mainly because this is the structure that we usually work in, and I guess most developers work in as well. You have a client sitting in between the consumer and you as the vendor. But if you bring out your own project, all of a sudden you're in direct contact with the consumer, and all the love and all the hate is getting straight through you, which is great, but can also be annoying. So we got a lot of people complaining that they want their 99 cents back because the bus didn't ride at that time, and we were like, okay, yeah, so be it. So, but the problem was we didn't really have a real development team. We just had like a freelancer who did it on for free, and we were just sharing the outcomes of the App Store sales. We didn't have a real customer support, so there's no way to handle all the love and hate we were getting. And we didn't have a real business model. As I said, like selling the app is not the right way to do it. So there was no reason to continue. So we said, okay, let's shut it down, but we'll do it better next time. And the next time I'll show you now is tackle is completely different industries, more of a gaming approach. This is the status quo right now for prediction games. That's very popular in Germany, like especially during the World Cup or soccer, when people come together in groups and bet on different games, and they often even bet money. But it's within friends, and this is the market leader right now. It looks like this. It looks like 15 years old, I'd say. And on the other hand, there is those standard bookies, like where you can bet on games with money, and most of the time the bank wins. So we thought, isn't there a nice way to say, you play with friends, but we handle the payment, meaning both of you or both players throw in something in the middle, like €5, for example, and then the company gets 50 cents of that, and the winner gets 95% of it. I thought that would be a nice model if that could be handled through the app. Turns out that's illegal gambling. So, shit. So that means that's not a good business model then. If it's illegal, that'll make it hard. So we came to the decision, okay, should we then do it at all? And I talked to a few people from the industry, and they were all like, yes, there are many ways to legalize it or to monetize it in a legal way. Just not have the money come from the bets itself. And they were actually looking for someone to take a different approach at this industry. So we decided, okay, if we do it, then we should do it real this time and actually hire developers and set up a real structure, set up a new company, and that's what we did. And we came up with this app. This has a very gamification approach to this whole concept. You can we call it tackle, so you can tackle friends whenever you want to. And we do have a wager, so you can bet on money. and you can bet on drinks. But the money is not actual money, it's credits. So it's a virtual currency, but it still gives you the idea that there is something on stage there, and we're playing for something. And this is still kind of like in stealth mode, so it is in the App Store now, but it's not final, but we'll be launching a final version within the next few weeks. There's never final, but I'll show you a short video of how it works. We've just started, yeah. So you can just choose whatever games you like from a list, then set the scores. This is also very playful, just a lot of animations, instead of like typing it into your keyboard or things like that. And then select friends from your list, and then you can set that wager that I was mentioning before. Either you pick credits or you bet for a few drinks, like coffee or beer or a shot, and that could of course be extended afterwards. And then you can watch the games live and compare to your friends, and we're working on that right now, but that should come out soon. And I can't tell yet whether or not that'll be successful. So far, it's just costing a lot of money, but it's fun. It's very interesting to work on your own project and be investor, manager, designer, all in one person, because you now understand all those fights that product managers and developers and everybody's going through on their own. Now you have that all in one person, because also the development team is part in-house, so it's not like I can blame the developers from this other agency or from the company. It's like we're all one team, and this is really how it should be. But the good news is it doesn't always have to be a self-initiated project. There are many projects or many companies as well that do understand now that creatives have to be heavily involved in the development phase of a project, and ideally from early on. And that happened for us with Whoop. Whoop is a company that creates a fitness tracker, although they don't like to call it a fitness tracker. It's a performance optimization tool, and that actually is true. It's not like a Fitbit or Jawbone that just counts your steps. It is more than that. It is. I'll show you later what it actually is. But when they approached us, this is what they had: a very bulky prototype up there and a sketch from the founder together with a few words. And the idea was to approach professional athletes and help them to understand their body better and really get the most out of their body. And they approached us before even the hardware was done designed. So we started designing UI UX before we even looked into the hardware. And this is the device by now. I'm wearing one right here, and it's tracking your heart rate 24/7. And but by now the company actually grew exponentially. They're really successful. We started 6 or 7 years ago, and back then we had nothing but those sketches and those prototypes. And now they're in a huge office in Boston, overlooking Fenway, and have a great team of developers and designers and project engineers and signal processing engineers. And we were there all the way from the beginning to launch, to actually bringing it to life, and in heavily contact with all of the team, with the developers, with their designers. And also, as I mentioned before, with the industrial design team, they started 2 years after we started designing the software. I was actually there in New York as an advisor from the software side to help guide the hardware design. And I think this is a great sign that companies understand that this is the important part, like really having a platform that handles all the data. And this is how the system works. It is already updated, it doesn't look like that anymore, but still want to show you what their main focus is, and that is recovery. So they track your heart rate and a lot of other things like heart rate variability, and they tell you each morning how recovered you are, how much strain your body can actually take on that day. Because professional athletes tend to overtrain and do too much to their body, and that leads to injuries, and that is a problem for teams and everyone. And so they're focusing on this, and it's about your resting heart rate, your heart rate variability, and really about sleep, because sleep is the only thing that that you can control that helps you to become a better recovery. And you can definitely see that it works. Whenever you go out drinking, for example, your recovery score usually looks like this the next morning. Your HRV is really down, and your resting heart rate goes up into the 80s or even worse. And it's really it's interesting to see that people then understand how their body works to some degree. And there's a whole platform behind it that also works for teams and for coaches where they can monitor their team. And there's a sleep coach that helps you to understand when you should go to bed, if you want to wake up at that time, if you want to peak tomorrow. And what we ended up seeing is that good design, if data is presented the right way, that can actually change the user's behavior. So we did a survey with a bunch of Harvard athletes that were wearing the Whoop device, and after roughly 130 days, they reported that they are dedicating an additional 41 minutes of sleep per night. So meaning they spend 41 more minutes in bed each night, which is huge. And that was one of the biggest learning for me too, finally wearing one of the devices, understanding that sleep isn't necessarily, doesn't equal the time in bed doesn't equal your sleeping time. You lose so much time being awake, trying to fall asleep, and so on. So that is huge that people understand that and just dedicate more time in bed. And also drink caffeinated beverage before bed 86% less often, drink less alcohol, and together with other things. And by now, as I said, they're quite successful and in the news, and a lot of pro teams are wearing it. But what I really want to talk about is this article right here, that there is a new business model that NFL players can now wear one of those Whoops and sell their health data. So it's really about the data that it's gathering. So they could actually reach out to, let's say, ESPN or one of the other big sports networks and say, hey, you can have my data and use it for your coverage. And then they could compare, let's say, the defensive line to the offensive line, how recovered they are, what their heart rate is doing, and so on. And this is a really interesting model because that shows you that they're understanding that the data they're sitting on is really what has the most value. And this is also why they recently changed their business model from selling the device for actually a pretty big amount to changing to a membership to subscription model, because it's a constantly evolving system and it's not the hardware that really is unique. It's unique too, but the software is really where all of it comes together. And you can tell that for other industries too, that if it's handled right and visualized right, that data and information really becomes the backbone of a company and their main and most valuable good, pretty much. And there's one last project I'd like to show. We didn't work on that, but it's a great example on how you can turn data into a business model. Strava is a fitness tracking app. It sounds like all the others. It's just like you can go out for a run or for a bike ride or anything, and it just tracks your route and your speed and other things. But what they do really well is they have, I don't want to call it artificial intelligence, but some algorithms that figure out where you're running and who else was running there. So it gives you like your personal records for a certain segment that you were running, and it compares you to other people who are also running that segment. It gives you rankings, and of course that's more of a playful approach. But of course it keeps you going, keeps you into the system. And they also have like playful things like this little map here where you can just compare your run and see those dots moving on the map and see where everybody was running and who you passed and whatever. And that all seems just like a toy or a playful thing. And you might say the same thing for this map here. This is their heat map, where you can see all the runs and all the bike rides that were tracked throughout the world. And you can zoom out and in and see that. And just playing around with it, it feels like, oh, it's an interesting toy, but I don't know what to do with it. But it turns out that this actually can turn into a really great business model. There, you see here that you can change between bike and runs and so on. But then if you see what's behind that, that you have so much data about how bikes are riding in cities, how people are running in cities, that you can actually approach cities and communities themselves and help them to build a better infrastructure. And that's really what they did. And actually, I don't know who approached who, if it was a city who said, hey, we want your data, or if it was the other way around. But by now, they have a new project, or a new, almost like a spin-off company, which is called Strava Metro. And they work very deeply together with communities and cities all over the world and help them build better bike lines in their cities and help them to prevent accidents between cars and bikes and runners and so on. And this is the software you'd be getting then if you're a community and if you want to look into it and compare it. And it's just a great example of how data can become a whole new business model. And I think this is happening more and more in different companies. A fun side thing, though, is maybe that some of you read about it, is that there are, of course, also a lot of army people using the device or using the Strava app, and just by looking at the data of this heat map, you could tell where military bases of the US were, because those soldiers were running in circles around their bases, and just by that you could find out where those bases were, which also shows you like the responsibility you have there, because big data is, of course, usually it's anonymous and you can't pin it down to a specific person. But if you combine it and compare it in the right way, you might get to findings like this. So there's always an upside and a downside to all this huge data that we're sitting on, that we're dealing with. But the good thing is that I feel like we're just scratching on the surface there. There's so many industries where design and software and data visualization doesn't really play a role yet. And the good thing is there are endless possibilities in all those different areas where this can have a huge impact. Medicine is one of them I'd like to call out, because we just were approached by a client that we just started working on. They kind of want to turn the medicine industry around, and we're starting to get some insights there, and it's actually frightening to see what doctors nowadays are dealing with. It's like really, really old-fashioned. There's nothing, not a smart software or anything that is helping them to understand the huge amounts of data that we actually gather from the body. And they're trying to turn that around and make it more of like a predictive system versus just treating symptoms. And I think there are many, many more examples that are going in this direction. But nevertheless, I think being in this world, in this digital world, either as a designer or a developer, it's very exciting times, and there is just more and more coming, and I'm really excited for all the things that are on their way. And with this, I'd like to come to an end and say thanks for your attention.